This is Hino's Sport, bringing you that heat and that fire. We keeping the foot on the what? On the next. We keeping the foot on the what? On the next. Now let's get on to it, man. Mike Tyson is officially a DuckTales. Woo! A DuckTales. Woo! There's a stranger out to find you. There's a stranger out to find you. What you do is grab on you some DuckTales. Woo! Ducking Evander Holyfield. Now there's chatter. People are saying Evander Holyfield is having issues. He's not cleared with his doctor. Yada, yada, yada. That's just noise that they're saying to protect the aura of Mike Tyson. See, Mike Tyson has the same dichotomy that Roy Jones Jr. has. They were fighters that once had this aura of invincibility, that they just couldn't be beat and that they were just embarrassing opponents. Tyson did it in a more cutthroat, in a more vicious style of knocking you out variation. It's just raw power, but he did this with athleticism and explosion at a heavyweight division that we haven't not seen and we probably will never see. He's unique. I'll give him that. But in his uniqueness, he had the same issue that Roy Jones Jr. had, which was he fought off of instincts and he fought off of reflexes. Let me say it again. He fought off of instincts and he fought off of reflexes. But here's the other thing that's the issue with Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson is a very good lateral movement fighter, right? He moves laterally very well, very Bane-like. But Mike Tyson is the type of fighter that when you look at the bottom line of it, you could see that Mike Tyson had issues where stamina came into effect. And certain fighters understood, okay, if I go to distance with him, what type of fighter will he be? Now, I know people are saying, well, Mike Tyson, because, you got your Mike Tyson fanboys. Super fanboy variation. Mike Tyson was partying, man, when he fought against Buster Douglas, man. Mike Tyson was not the same Mike Tyson anymore. His trainer passed away. Yada, 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 yada. Right? Here's my thing. Mike Tyson was brainwashed by his trainer. Brainwashed so much so to the point that Mike Tyson had no identity. So that was the first issue with him. This is why Mike Tyson was able to get mentally done up by Don King the way that he did. Because Mike Tyson was just one of those boxers that he was just missing a few screws upstairs. He wasn't all the way together. Mike Tyson was the type of person that he goes wherever the wind takes him. And he ran his boxing career that way. You saw how his boxing career turned out. You saw how his personal life turned out. All in the spotlights because Mike Tyson was that guy that entourage of folks would just steer him in directions that were not the best decisions for him. Either mentally, either financially, either physically, or either emotionally. We know the Mike Tyson story because it's been put in our face over and over and over again. I'll give Mike Tyson credit. He's been working to try to turn himself around. But here's the issue. In doing that, that transformation would have been concrete if he didn't bring his butt back into the boxing ring. Let me say it again. That transformation would have been concrete if he didn't bring his butt back into the boxing ring. There was no need for that. No one's asking for an old geezer's fight between Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. And if we are wanting to see old geezers go at it, which is something I don't want, because when a fighter is well past their prime and way beyond, boxing is a sport that takes a toll on people. I actually care for these boxers. I don't know about other boxing fans. Maybe they just want to see two people beat their heads up. I don't know. Because to me, the sweet science has always been hit and don't get hit. And if we are going to watch exciting fights where people are knocking each other out, then at least these fighters need to be of age where they can still be able to do this shit, man. Let me say it again. They still need to be of age where they can still do this shit. There's rules of engagement to this shit. There's levels to this stuff, man. Shout outs to Meek Mills. There's years. You're talking about two guys, and Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr., that are well past their prime. Mike Tyson has not fought since the mid-2000s. And when he had that last fight, it was a sideshow. It was a major dud. So why are we getting a guy that's 54 years old? We don't know if he's taking PEDs. We don't know if he's on some substance enhancement. We don't know if his heart is potentially give out on him. We don't have the ins and outs of his full health report. Just like people want to sit here and make excuses about Evander Holyfield. Why didn't I talk about Mike Tyson? Isn't he an older guy? So he's ready to go, but Evander's not? I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. But if we are going to entertain an old geezer's fight, why shouldn't it be Mike Tyson versus Evander Holyfield? Because it was those two guys that were training. How did Roy Jones Jr. come into the mix of this? The reason why Roy Jones Jr. came into the mix of it is because it's very clear that him and Mike Tyson, they just want the money, man. It's a money grab. But this is a sideshow major dud. It makes no sense to the lamest boxing fan. Now, to people that watch the sport of boxing, that are clueless and tell you that they're so-called professionals or connoisseurs or purists, they just want to see two people bash their heads in. That makes absolutely no sense. But if you are going to entertain something like that, then it needs to be dancing partners that makes the most and appropriate sense. Mike Tyson makes the most sense for Evander Holyfield because they are natural heavyweights. But Mike Tyson is ducking Evander Holyfield because the same fundamental issue that Roy Jones Jr. has with Antonio Tarver, it's the same fundamental issue that Mike Tyson has with Evander Holyfield. Mike Tyson tried a second return. And after Mike Tyson damn near mangled McNeely, right? Damn near whooped his ass. He was on a tear. He came back. He was dominating like nobody's business. Then he ran up to Evander Holyfield. A guy who said, listen, I'm going to be just as grimy as you are in the boxing ring. I'm going to use whatever tricks I can use because the tricks that he's using are technically boxing tricks. You could call it dirty as you want, but this is something we've known this to be true. Sean Porter does this shit. Throws his fucking forehead at people. We've seen this before. Marcos Maidana does this. This is nothing new. Victor Ortiz, we've seen this, man. The list goes on and on and on of fighters that have used this tactic. It's called roughhousing tactics. It's nothing new. Evander Holyfield didn't want Mike Tyson to go in there and just get his angles going on. He didn't want Mike Tyson to go in there and just out-lateral him. He understood if I drain this guy and I push him to the limits, just like Buster Douglas did, and I use that blueprint and I'll stamina him because there's a blueprint to screw him over, I could win the fight. And that's what Evander Holyfield did. You got to understand the mental scarring that had on a Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson is not all the way up there because he bit Evander Holyfield's ear off. That told you everything you needed, everything that you needed to know with his mental psychology. So Mike Tyson turns around and runs it back with Evander Holyfield because obviously he's not content in the first fight. And in that second fight, Evander Holyfield beats him more definitively. If the first fight was so controversial, the second fight was definitive in Evander Holyfield's favor. There's a reason why Mike Tyson does not want to fight Evander Holyfield. Because Evander Holyfield has figured Mike Tyson out. Just like Antonio Tarver has figured out Roy Jones Jr. And boxing fans that revere the Roy Jones Jr. and revere Mike Tyson, they don't want to see that kind of pairing. Mike Tyson versus Evander Holyfield. Roy Jones Jr. versus Antonio Tarver. Because they don't want to see their folklore legends. Because these are super fanboys, man. I've never seen fanboys like fanboys for Mike Tyson and fanboys for Roy Jones Jr. They just don't operate in the realms of reality. They don't want to see Mike Tyson get exposed. They actually want to see a fight that fits their theology in boxing, which is a bunch of shit. If you are a true boxing purist and a true boxing connoisseur, you want to see fighters fight who they are naturally supposed to fight. It just makes the most commonest sense. But what I realize in life is most people don't have common sense. Common sense is not common, so you can't expect them to have it. Let me say it again. Most people don't have common sense. Common sense is not common, so you can't expect them to have it. Why is Mike Tyson a DuckTales? Woo! A DuckTales. Woo! There's a stranger out to find you. There's a stranger out to find you. What to do is grab on you some ducktails. Woo! Why is he ducktailing Evander Holyfield? And the reason why is because Evander Holyfield has opened the floodgates, in so much so that Lennox Lewis was able to use that same blueprint, and that's how he defeated Mike Tyson. Because Evander Holyfield is right here. He's living rent and space-free in Mike Tyson's head, soaking up all the damn AC. Let me say it again. He's living rent and space-free in Mike Tyson's head, soaking up all the damn AC. We've seen this in boxing before. When a fighter has your number, you don't want to open up those skeletons. Because you know if you open up those skeletons, you potentially open yourself up to be exposing it. This is what's going on with Evander Holyfield, and this is what's going on with Mike Tyson. This is why there's this cockamamie switch all of a sudden to where it's Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr. Because what those who were putting this fight together realize is, hold up, we want Mike Tyson to look a certain way. We want Mike Tyson to be dominant a certain way. This ain't the right dancing partner for him to do that with, because this guy actually is going to fight a fight to where he's going to expose him again. And they didn't want that. That's the cold-hearted. That's the unadulterated. And that's the cutthroat two-color fashion. And if you are a true boxing fan, you have to ask yourself the fundamental question. Why is Mike Tyson ducking Evander Holyfield? Just like you have to ask yourself that question, why is Roy Jones Jr. ducking Antonio Tarver? And you know the only thing he knows the sport can come up with? A ducktails. Woo! A ducktails. Woo! There's a stranger out to find you. There's a stranger out to find you. What to do is grab on you some ducktails. Woo! It's a ducktails, y'all. And once a ducktails, always a ducktails. Keep that same energy, boxing community fan base. Keep that same energy, dog. This is Hino's Sport. Checking out.